Thank you very much for your hard work, and we want to make sure people know about it and know what you're working on and what you're doing. So important when you're working on reforms and new ideas that it gets out there, that you effectively communicate so you can win those kitchen table conversations. You can build support from the grassroots up, reaching parents and educators and lawmakers. So you have some pros here today who will tell you how to refine and hone your message and how to be most effective. So we will turn over to them for quick introductions, then we'll have a discussion, and you'll have a chance to ask questions at the end as well. So let's get started with Mike Murphy, a partner in the Revolution Agency, a strategic communications firm in D.C. He serves as a pundit and political analyst. I'm sure you've seen him all over the place. He writes the widely read Murphy's Law column for Time Magazine and frequently appears on Meet the Press. Let's welcome Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you very much. Can you hear me here? Is this So welcome and thank you for your work in education. I don't think there's anything more important in America than upward social mobility, and nothing is a bigger part of that than education. So thank you for what you're doing. You are in the special space, I think, in public policy. And I'm very happy to be here with you. I'm going to speak briefly about some of the polling data that's been done, particularly around Common Core. I work a lot with Governor Bush's foundation, and we've done a project we call the Message Lab down in Florida, where we did, I think, about the most intensive amount of public opinion research surrounding some of these issues that has been done. And we want to share that intellectual property of everybody in the movement here, and hopefully it'll be useful to you. I'm going to focus in my remarks quickly on Common Core. Now, when we did this, we took Florida, a big megastate, because one, it's big and important. Two, we're having the public policy debate there. And three, lots of pieces of Florida are perfect microcosms for other states. The Tampa Bay area in particular really matches up with just about anywhere in America. So it's kind of like the old Broadway thing, if it works in Peoria, well, if it works in Tampa Bay, it pretty much applies across the country. So here are kind of the top line lessons we learned. And it's all good news. First thing is, nobody knows much. That's a huge opportunity. I always want to be in the new information business, because that's the best thing you can be doing in communications, is presenting new information. Because new information is how you change minds, how you build constituencies, how you frame an argument. So ears are open and ready to listen. If you talk to parents just about anywhere in America, most will tell you they don't know much about Common Core. And those that do know something about Common Core will say it'll be about 50-50. In other words, about half will say, yeah, I kind of like what I know. About half will say, I don't think I like it, but I don't know much. Nobody really has any depth to that knowledge. They're ready to be persuaded. Now, there are two other cohorts that are important, because we don't only want to talk to, although they are the most important audience, the consumers of education, parents and students. We also care a lot about rank and file teachers, because they're really the ambassadors of information out there. All polling shows nobody is more credible when people want to know about what's really going on in education than teachers. The good news is teachers are 2-to-1 favorable. Now, they have questions too. They don't know that much about it, but what they know they like. And that's excellent news. They have concerns about implementation. There are always details, how it's going to work. But the basic thrust of it, they start out feeling quite positive, over 60% positive, down around 28% unfavorable. That's what we in the political racket call a 2-to-1 ratio of good to bad. You always want that. That is very good. So there you go. The most important influencers in the process start out feeling pretty good about it. Huge asset. One problem group we have are Republican primary voters. Am I surprising anybody here? There's been plenty of criticism, and so among Republican primary voters, they start out 2-to-1 negative on Common Core. But they don't know anything about it. They know one thing. They think it's a secret plot controlled by red Chinese robots in the basement of the White House. And so, no wonder they don't like it. That's all they know. So what the polling says quite clearly is the more people learn, the more they like it. We went through an exercise, and we polled teachers, we polled parents, we polled everybody. And we went through an exercise where we introduced a lot of positive messages, and we introduced some of the critical messages people are getting, some of which are just frankly inaccurate. But we wanted to simulate the real world. And I can tell you at the end of it, everybody became more positive. After the positive and the negative messages. Among parents, still better than 2-to-1. Among teachers, still better than 2-to-1. And even among Republican primary voters, who are not all Republicans, by the way, we're talking about base activists, it went from 2-to-1 negative to about even. Actually, it's slightly positive. So there you go. This is a new information battle, and my colleagues here are going to talk a little bit about the tactics of how you do that. But the more people learn in a focused way, the better. And let me finish my remarks about what I mean by a focused way. We're in a very, very cluttered society. We are bombarded with zillions of advertising messages. And so one of the ways you break through is to really focus. And there are a couple of rules of communications, you're going to hear more about that from Peter and Michael, that really help you do that. One is don't be afraid of repetition, okay? Repetition is your friend. Bores you to death, it's how you break through. Second, speak English in your messaging. What's great about the education world is people are so committed. There's a big strata of us, and we've invented our own language. We have special words we've invented. And so we talk to each other in our special words, and everybody else sounds like Greek. You got to get to the parents, students, and classroom teachers. And parents and students particularly, you got to talk to them in English. Now, what are the two most powerful words in the history of advertising? New and improved. We're in the new and improved business with Common Core standards. So you want to make sure your message is simple, and it's good news, and it's about how you help people have a better life for their kids. This is a unifying message. It's not a divisive one. And you've just got to use all the tactics, we'll talk about that more, in order to be able to push that stuff through. The good news here is, as we know from all this polling data on this message lab we did, the more you can break your message through out there, through all the millions of ways you can do it, the more you can tell people that there's good stuff coming. It'll make their lives better. And the more you can repeat and push that through, the better we're going to do. Because our stuff, the positive messages, the truth about Common Core standards, sells with just about everybody a lot better than the negative messages. The worst group breaks even. Everybody else net favor. So we should not hide from a communications battle. Too often we start thinking a little internally like, well, we might get a bad clip. Maybe we shouldn't call that reporter back. I'm of the view you always engage. Because a mixed clip is still better than nothing, and you will get good clips. It's a volume business. And when the goal is the more you can get this stuff out there, the better you're going to do, of course you want to talk to the media. And know internally, there are going to be some great stories. There are going to be stories where the reporter might get it wrong. You know, not everything's going to be perfect. But the more noise you make about the positives of this, the more that message will get out and the better the cause will do. So communication is about simple focus, repetition, messages in English, talking to people about things relevant to them, benefits, new and improved. The old ad joke, you never want to sell the drill, you want to sell the hole it makes. Talk about the new and improved benefits and pound it through. You'll have success in communications. Look forward to questions. We can talk more about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mike's all about messaging. Now we're going to talk about media relations. And our guru there is Peter Cunningham, Senior Advisor at Whiteboard Advisors, President of Cunningham Communications. Luckily for us, he specializes in things like education reform, government policy, those kinds of things. He advised then Superintendent Arnie Duncan at Chicago Public Schools and then joined Secretary Duncan at the U.S. Department of Education as Assistant Secretary for Communications and Outreach. Let's welcome Peter.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I want to try and demystify a little bit what a communication strategy is very quickly, because I go through this exercise with every client, with everybody I talk to. And at its most simple level, it really comes down to three things, three questions you need to answer. The first question is, who are you trying to reach? And in education, there are a number of different audiences. There's parents, there's teachers, there's opinion makers, there's, policy makers. So you have to decide who your audience is. The second thing is you have to decide what you're saying, what Mike was talking about with message. If you can answer the question, who's your audience and what's your message? And then the third question is, how are you reaching them? And today, there's more ways to reach people than ever before. Paid media, traditional media, social media, which Michael's going to talk about, direct outreach, there's face-to-face meetings. So if you can answer those three questions, who's your audience, what's your message, how are you reaching them, you actually have the basic framework for a communication strategy. And I go through that exercise with everybody, and I encourage every one of you to challenge yourself to answer those questions in a straightforward way. So, proactive communications. I've worked with a lot of organizations that are on defense. They're getting attacked. They call, say, help. Sometimes the best defense is offense. David Foster Wallace, a writer, talked about how difficult it was to write a novel. He said, writing a novel is like trying to carry a sheet of plywood through a hurricane. And that's a good metaphor for what it's like to hold on to your narrative when you're in the middle of a challenging situation, when you're being challenged from different sides. Hold on to that piece of plywood. First of all, figure out what it is. That's your core message. That's your core narrative. Figure out what that is and hold on to it, and make sure that on a continuing and consistent basis, at least 70% of the time, maybe, 70% of the time, you're telling your story versus responding to what other people are saying. You really have to drive your narrative. The other thing I spend a lot of time doing with clients is a very simple process that I call seeing around corners. Just wargaming out situations. It never ceases to amaze me how many people don't think about the reaction to the thing that they're about to say. They're about to put out a press release, they're about to put out a statement, they're about to put out a study, and they think, I got my story. And they forget that everyone else who's going to see that study is going to react. Think about that. It's simple. It's not even chess. It's really checkers. It's not that hard. Third point is frame or be framed. Framing is critically important. Mike's an expert on it. He can tell you that you have to decide what you're talking about. If you're talking about Common Core, and if you're against it, you're going to keep calling it national standards. They're going to keep on calling it national standards when those of us who are supporting Common Core know that these were created by states, they're adopted by states, the federal government doesn't have a role in standards. And yes, the federal government did play a role, and I was there in encouraging people to adopt Common Core or high college and career ready standards. But that is not the same. We have to talk about college and career ready. We have to drive our message. We have to frame this the way we want to talk about it. Same thing about charters. Charters, is it about choice? Is it about quality? Or if you're against it, is it about privatization, which is a term you're seeing an awful lot these days. That's framing, and it's very important that you understand it and think about it with respect to your issue. One of my favorite phrases is this. A lot of folks here are probably involved in policy. I always think of policy as a scalpel, but message is a sledgehammer. Okay? Message needs to hit people right over their head. It needs to be clear. It needs to be clean. It needs to be strong. Too often, policy folks get on the phone with reporters and they start explaining the glorious little grainy details about this policy. They just can't understand why the guy doesn't get it. And he doesn't get it too often because they don't say what it means. They say what it is. They spend all their time describing what it is. This is what it is. It means that kids at this income level who get to have these conditions get to experience this program and they get to go to this place. And it's like you're way in the weeds. You have to challenge yourself to get out of the weeds and to say what this means for people. The other point I want to make is if you're dealing with reporters, always assume, before you get on the phone, assume that you will have only one quote. You will probably have only one quote, unless it's a big, broad Q&A with you. You're Arnie Duncan, you're the Secretary of Education, you're going to do a Q&A and you get to say as much as you want. That's not your situation mostly. Mostly you're called and you have one quote. You should figure out what that quote is before you get on the phone. And you should bridge back to it as often as you can. That means, you know, you get asked about A, you say, well, here's the answer to A, but let me tell you about B. And you keep coming back to your point. Very important. A lot of people struggle with that. He talked about the new information business. Often I sit down with a client and they don't know what they're going to announce next week. They don't know what they're doing next month. Or they haven't even written it down and looked at it and thought about it. They haven't thought about what other people are doing that they may be a part of. So I challenge every client to sit down and come up with a 6-month calendar. Tell me the next 12 things we're going to do over the next 6 months. We're putting out this study. We're going to this place. We're doing a town hall here. We're going there. We're doing this. We're doing that. Write that down. Look at that. Make sure it's consistent. Drive stories. I worked with Arnie in Chicago. We'd have the budget every February. We'd have test score results every November. We'd have the opening of school every September. We knew exactly what was happening month after month after month. We thought about it. We planned. We thought ahead. We tried to figure out how to make the best use of that. Drive content. Generate stories. Keep your story going. You're in the new information business, as Mike said. He said that yesterday, and I really like that phrase, so I'm going to steal it from him. People are afraid of reporters. Reporters, for the most part, just want information. They want access. They want responsiveness. They also like a few things like exclusives, et cetera. They like an angle. The classic man bites dog is the angle, something that's a little unusual, a little different. But they're not scary. As Mike said, I'm for engaging. I'm always for engaging. I always respond to reporters. You know, they have their problem. They have their deadlines. They have to meet that. Don't be afraid to talk to them. Give them information. If it turns out that you get burned by them, well, you remember that. And over time, if you have somebody who's consistently burning you, then you're going to treat them differently. But for the most part, they're just in the business of trying to get information. And you're in the business of providing it. two stories to think about, because they're very different, especially in the education kind of reform world. I call them issue stories, where you have a reporter who really wants to dig into an issue, wants to really understand it, wants to look into the facts, wants to, read the studies, wants to get independent confirmation, gather data, talk to experts. Those are great stories. When you have a reporter who wants to go that way, it's great. On the other hand, you have battle stories. When you have a reporter who just wants to quote this guy yelling at you and that guy yelling at her and everything, he said, she said, you have to engage with them, but know the difference between the two of them because they're very different. In the case of a battle story, you just want to get your quote together and make sure you're represented in there. Sometimes you can't push the reporter off of that frame. But when you get the issue stories, you really want to go deep with that reporter. Give them a chance to dig in. Give them a chance to really understand. Common Core is a good example. This story is now playing out. Like you can have a story at the national level about the Tea Party screaming its national standards, and that's like a battle story. It's not really based in reality. It's just sort of based in kind of emotional, high-level politics. But if you have stories, if you have reporters who say, I want to go into a classroom, and I want to see how this is actually playing out with teachers, and what kind of training they're getting, and how it's changing with kids, and how kids are experiencing it, that's great. We want more of those. To the extent you can help create those kinds of stories, that's going to help us, because that's going to help reasonable, thoughtful people and parents and neutral people understand, hey, this is a good thing. These kids are going to get smarter. They're being challenged in different ways. This is what I want. So think about issue stories versus battle stories. The more you're going to have these instead of these, the better off we're all going to be. So lastly, I'm just going to give you a couple of takeaways I have from the ed reform wars, just for you to think about, and then hopefully they'll trigger a little conversation. I think that the topic here is winning the kitchen table conversation. I think we're not even at the kitchen table in many, many homes in America. We're not talking to parents. We talked about jargon, talked about the fact that the language doesn't really resonate with parents, but we're also just not reaching them. Most parents get their information from their teacher and their school. We're operating up here. We have to figure out, broadly speaking, I don't have a simple answer for this. It may involve Michael's stuff here on social media. We have to figure out how to really, really connect with parents. Because if you have parents on your side in education, you can do anything you want, because they are the ultimate force, in my opinion. Teachers and unions, they're very different. Unions obviously they're a special interest, they're a constituency, they do their job. Their job is to fight for their members. I don't begrudge them their job, but teachers are teachers. They're different, and I think you need to really keep that in mind as you manage your communications. I talked about audiences before. Sometimes that audience is the union leaders around the country, but sometimes that audience is the teachers, and there's different language. When it comes to kids and education, I think hope beats fear. There's a lot of talk about fear in education. We're going to falling behind in the world. That message polls well. It polls well in a political climate. But when you're at the local level, the ground level, and you're talking about kids and schools and teachers and their lives, I tend to favor the positive. I think it works much better. People respond better. They want to know that there's something positive that's going to happen here. I think that if you did a town hall and you stood up in front of a bunch of parents and you gave them a big fearful message, they're not going to stand up and cheer and say, let's go with you. They're going to say, wow, I'm really bummed out. Something like 85 or 90% of parents think their kids are going to get a college degree, 4-year college degree, but only 30% do. They don't know. They don't know what's going on. So you have to educate, but you have to also show them in America, every single kid who wants a college degree can get one. But some things have to happen. They've got to work hard. We've got to have these high standards. We've got to have great teachers. So those are my quick lessons. I look forward to the conversation. I turn it over now to Michael.
Peter, thank you very much. And thank you for the plug for reporters that were not scary. We are looking for information. Much appreciated. We'll move on now to Michael Bassik. He is the U.S. Digital Practice Chair at Burson-Marsteller, CEO of Proof Integrated Communications. Work with a lot of high-profile clients you're going to recognize: IBM, Google, the DNC, John Kerry for president, Hillary Clinton for president, and Obama for America. He's going to help us with the high-tech angle. Let's welcome Michael.
So what I hear most when it comes to the internet is, well, actually I don't hear, it's usually like a blank stare of confusion. Everyone sort of knows by now what to do to engage traditional media. They understand, well, here are the reporters who are covering my beat, and I can call them or they can call me, and I know how to do grassroots organizing. But if you said to somebody, well, how are you going to use the internet? It's a very daunting, confusing question, because the internet is a daunting and confusing, unscaled, complicated medium. We use it as consumers completely differently than we use it to influence conversations. So there are a few sort of best practices that I'd recommend as you all go back and think about how you can leverage the internet to help you with your cause. The first is sort of obvious, and I guess we kind of all start with the sort of obvious, but know what you want to get out of the web. The internet can be, like I said, incredibly confusing, but if you come to it with a perspective of saying, we're going to use this to identify parents that we can communicate with over email to get them to come to events and activities, that's our most important priority, well then you need to set out to do that, and instead of being distracted by we're going to be countering negative information about accountability every time it arises. So the first thing would sort of be to set your goals when you're engaging online. The second would be know your reputation. Frame yourself before you get framed. Google yourself before someone Googles you. We've all Googled ourselves. I hope you all are pleased with your results. I don't know how you feel about Googling your organization or Googling a particular issue, because right now, more people are going to form opinions about you by a Wikipedia entry than probably 10 articles in traditional media combined, because every parent, every teacher, every legislator, every reporter is going to go online the second they hear something, before they call you, before they contact you, before they have a conversation. And even if a reporter is going to contact you directly, they're going to Google you first to figure out, who am I speaking with? And then they're going to Google the organization and say, what are they all about and what are people saying about them? And then they're going to look online at the issues. This is how they get educated today, especially with the sort of churn we see in journalism, especially online journalism, with younger, less educated reporters. They're using the internet to learn about you. So you should make sure that your reputation online is what you want it to be. This sort of ties in with a little bit of how do you communicate online. I imagine a lot of you, whether it's school choice or accountability or Common Core, you probably go online every now and then and you Google Common Core. You Google accountability, you Google school choice. And those are very difficult conversations to like maneuver online. But I did a search this morning on Google for FILO, which is the acronym for First and Last Out. And first it wanted me to order Greek food. Told me I'd spelled the word incorrectly. And then most of the results were, had nothing, I mean, all of the results had nothing to do, except there was internet slang acronym finder.com that just told me what FILO stands for. So there are people right now, probably hundreds of people each week, who go online and search FILO because they're teachers and they want to know what's going on, or they want to understand policies, they want to know what it means to them, and no one is having a conversation with them online about that. So really go online, think about what people are searching for, and try to control the narrative so that it impacts your reputation. A few other sort of quick things, so I know we'll want to get to some questions. The internet is also a medium of moments. What do I mean by this? Right now, if you are focused on the debt, this is your moment. And for the last like 2 weeks, if you didn't have a plan in place and you didn't have your content ready to go and you didn't know what your messages were going to be online, what emails you were going to send, what you were going to tell parents and teachers for the rally you were holding, if this was your moment, you missed it. So be aware of these moments and prepare for these moments. Up next is immigration. Soon, maybe it'll be something either locally or federally that has to do with education. Be prepared for those moments. And lastly, because we'll talk, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, keep track. We always say what gets measured gets done. I can't tell you the number of organizations we work with who say, yes, I don't remember all the reporters I spoke with last year, nor am I following them online and social media to know what they're talking about today. No, I don't keep track of all those emails we got from all those people. It's so easy, whether you have a complex system like a CRM system, or you're just using a Google Doc or an Excel spreadsheet. It's really important you keep track of those relationships that exist online. There's a really great tool called Muckrack. It aggregates all of the tweets from every journalist in America, from every single news organization. It's free, and you could go online at any moment and do a search for the issues that you're passionate about and find the reporters who are talking about it, write them down, communicate with them, keep track, engage, and have fun. Had to say have fun, it's the internet.
Thank you, Michael. Let's start there, since we're talking about social media. So much of communication traditionally has been one way. You send out the press release, you return a reporter's phone call, that kind of thing. But so much of it is interactive now with Twitter, with Facebook. How much do you engage in the two-way conversation, and what role does discipline play in that?
Right, it's this weird double-edged sword, right? The internet's the first medium that allows anyone to communicate with everyone. And that's good and bad, because that means anybody online can say whatever they want about you, and it could be positive, it can be negative or neutral, and you have to determine as an organization, back to your goals, when you engage those individuals. Obviously, if it's positive or proactive, I'd encourage positive, proactive engagement. Peter has some really good rules that he uses and advises clients on when how to and when not to engage, but the sort of general rule of thumb is, if this is somebody who is angry, mean, all caps, foul language, you can ignore me. No, you can ignore that person. But even if say you put out a statement online, it's on Facebook, you posted something, or it's on your website or your blog, or there's even an article in a newspaper that talks about an issue that you're mentioned in, and people start commenting with facts or opinions, you should feel free to engage, because if you don't engage, when people go back and look at those conversations, they're just going to see all these people saying, that's not true, that's not right, this is wrong for us. And if you don't respond, who's going to respond? If everybody in this room just committed to the next time they see something negatively written online, but it was a coherent statement, by someone who just disagrees. If you proactively said, I'm going to go and create an account, or I'm going to respond to that person with messages and using best practices, that would be thousands of conversations that would have been beaten back. And you don't need an army of advocates to do that. You're all here in the room. So I don't know if you want to.
Peter, you want to share some of the rules of engagement?
Yeah, a couple of them, and I've shared this with some of my clients. If it's in traditional media, my instinct is always to respond. If it's coming from reasonable people, so they're respectful and they're committed to sort of an open, honest conversation, which is to say that if they're wrong, they'll admit it, or we can at least agree on some facts, I engage. Try not to engage with crazy people, and there's a lot of crazy people on the internet. And if they're wrong, if they're just dead wrong, you have the facts, you should engage. If you're wrong, you should also engage as well. Personal blogs, if you're a significant organization and somebody's writing a personal blog, I tend to not engage with them. Those are some of my general rules.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just want to chime in a little bit. From my own experience, I've been experimenting with Twitter, and I'm up to about 48,000 followers. Because I'm a bloviator on TV, that's not too surprising, but here's my trick. I've never put my Twitter address on television or radio. I wanted to see if I could build it organically by putting out tweets that people retweeted. And so one of the things I do now is I notice I get a lot of tweets back. In fact, there are a lot of people tweeting right here. I've already got some angry Tea Party people don't liking that crack somebody retweeted that I made about the White House basement. So now, I'm an Irish Catholic from Detroit, Michigan, so my first response is, listen, you stupid son of a... But what I've learned to do is the first thing when somebody... I ignore a lot of them, but when I see a particularly galling one, that's at least partially clever, I check how many followers they have. When I say they have 8 followers all in the state mental institution, I don't tend to respond. But when they have 3,000 followers, you know what? Sure, but I do it within the rules of message because I'll pick up a few net followers from that. So part of it is not all voices you see on social media are equal. There are some worth engaging with in a civil discussion because you always want to grow the amount of people getting your stuff, your message. And so that's the other filter I'd put on the electronic communication. And very, very quickly, the only thing I've got as an old geezer from politics to say about the internet is, in the old days, remember you go into a campaign manager's office, I started out as a kid, and we'd walk in, the campaign manager of like the state rep would have the lockbox, you know, the big, whatever was in the big lockbox, and then you'd open it up, there were stamps in there. And the volunteers would come in and they'd hand out the stamps like gold coins, and you'd put out 600 letters, and the big dominant weapon was you would try to convince volunteers and supporters to mail the postcard with a little note they'd write with the magic stamp they give you from the lockbox to their Christmas card list in the district. The internet is free stamps. And all your supporters are on social media and they can influence people. Now, you want, and Michael can tell you a lot more how to do this. You don't just tell them go influence people, but you create some of the tactics that Peter's talking about, good clips and other things that you can post on a central hive, and then using their Facebook or whatever their social media tool is, generally Facebook's the dominant one, they can send that to their Christmas tree list, not by writing 100 letters, which nobody wants to do, but by clicking one mouse. That is a revolutionary communications tool of incredible power.
All right, and Mike, if you have all these options, and there are so many new options for reaching people today, but they don't get what you're saying, it's a lost cause. You mentioned earlier sort of the wonkiness aspect, that education has its own language. How do you prepare to speak to the moms and dads, to those who aren't in education policy, but you need their grassroots support for whatever you're trying to do?
I think it's the same rules you've been hearing from my colleagues, which is make it simple and relevant to their lives. You know, people sometimes think in these policy debates you win by having a complicated 82-point plan, and we only discuss foreign policy in French, the language of world diplomacy. You get points for that? You don't get points. People are busy. People have very busy lives. You're competing with all that. So you want to get to them with a message they believe, because people are very cynical about political messages, and a message that's relevant to their lives. Here are 3 things we're doing here to make it a lot more likely your 4th grader will be able to go to college. It's interesting when you take a look at the testing data over the last 14 years that the flow-through, if you racially weight this or do that, no, that's your job. They're happy, voters, people are happy with experts being experts. What does it mean to me? What can I do? What can I believe? And when in doubt, always in English, never in jargon. Jargon is the enemy of communications.
And Peter, it's a different task, and you touched on this, when you're speaking to members of the media. How do you prepare to do that in ways that they understand the information, they can digest it, and your message is accurately getting out through those larger megaphones?
So as I said, you have to go a step beyond the what it is to what it means. You really have to say, well, here's a study, and the study shows that this particular training program produces these outcomes, and these outcomes produce these results for kids. So then you have to say, okay, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that a 3rd grader, today, X% of low-income 3rd graders are behind when they're in 3rd grade. They're 2 years behind. We have a training program here that shows you can make a year and a half up. So if we had teachers in this training program, by 6th grade, those kids would have caught up, because they would have got an extra year and an extra half a year in 4th grade, an extra half a year in 5th grade, and by 6th grade, they're even. So I think you need to figure out how to translate stuff into ways. When you were asking Mike about what this means, I wrote down 2 words, kids and outcomes, and that's exactly what he said. You talk, especially when you talk about to parents, you have to talk about what it means for your kid, because that's really the way parents focus on education. They don't think about education policy, and they don't think about education reform. They think about their kids. So talk about their kids and talk about outcomes. That's the most important thing. In terms of preparing for the media, the most important thing there is to find out where they're going first, which is to say, if I have a client who's going to do an interview with the media, I'll talk to you first, and I'll say, well, what do you want to talk about? And what are the questions? And sometimes reporters are fine telling you the questions, and sometimes they're like, well, I'm not going to give you all my questions in advance. That's fine. Just tell me generally what you want to talk about. I got to prepare my guy. So that's really important. And then I go back to what I said before. You have that piece of plywood. That's your narrative. That's your story. Put that right in front of people. Arnie Duncan was especially, his staff would produce these gigantic long briefing documents. Just history, background, all this stuff. And he'd take it home the night before and he'd read it. But then 30 seconds before the interview would start, he'd always turn to me and say, what am I saying? And I'd say this, this, and this, you know. And so I always trained all of the other media people to be prepared to answer that question. What are you saying? And so I just think that kind of preparation, that kind of clarity, that kind of simplicity is what you have to really know. And know where the reporter's coming from.
And when you're rolling things out, that's one time that you're going to meet the media face-to-face. What about when you have something controversial going on? Because when I was a local reporter covering some education issues, I won't name the city. There was one city that never wanted to talk to us.
Everyone's going to Google it now.
Well, there are a few cities. I'll let you figure out which one it was. But whether it was a good or bad story, we'd put in calls. They had spokespersons that were employed by the school district, and yet they never wanted to talk to us. And it made me wonder why that person was even on the payroll. So good or bad, they didn't want to speak to us, but especially when it was a negative story. What do you do with that?
The no comment school of media relations,
right?
I know, I'm just against it. I can tell you that in Chicago, there's 600 plus schools, and there were several reporters, so there was a competitive, several newspapers, so there was a competitive reporter environment, which is different. If you're in a town with only one reporter, the competition isn't as intense, but like in Chicago with Sun-Times and the Tribune. So these guys wanted to scoop each other. They were aggressive. They were pushing hard. It was a really aggressive media environment. But I was having a situation where every day I was getting a call from a principal saying, a reporter's here, what should I do? And I'm like, I don't know, let them in. What do they want to talk about? And so I set up a policy, and Arnie hated this, but I did it anyway. I said, anybody who wants to, in this whole district, I told the media this too, I said, anybody who wants to talk to a reporter can talk to a reporter. Okay, it's a free country. You can do it. And Arnie was just like, no. And I said, but here's the deal. If you talk to a reporter before you talk to me and you blow it, that's your fault. If you talk to me first, and help me, and I'll talk to you about it and help you think it through and blah, 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 and then you blow it, it's my fault. Okay? I take full responsibility if you blow it after you talk to me. And that changed everybody. It made it safe for them. They said they weren't worried about it. And you got to a point where, like, the reporters really wanted to get into the schools and see what was going on. And I wanted them to get into the schools and see what was going on. And everybody was being told you can't go into the schools. I'm like, guys, we're trying to get stories out about education. That's what we're here for. Stop with the no comment. Open the doors. Show the kimono, whatever.
What kind of schools were these?
Yeah, good question. So anyway, my point is that I just believe in openness. I believe in access. I think if you get burned, you can figure out what to do later. And I just had a policy that said we have to let them in. You got to give them stories, give them good news. We're in the new information business, as he said. And if you're always saying no comment, you're just out of business. And by the way, when a reporter has a negative story on you and you say no comment, he's still going to write the story, or she.
Right, and you want that slug in the story because that's better than nothing. I have one corollary to that because I totally agree. There is a good reporter trick, which is the reporter has kind of a hostile premise, and you do your message 3 times in a row, and the reporter will keep going until eventually you say, well, let me tell you the joke about the 3 guys, the rabbi, and then bingo, they got the quote, because they wear you down off your message. So you got to know, you always want to communicate, but there's a time to stop communicating and not give them a long essay that they can edit, particularly in a more hostile. You always want to be in the story, but if you keep going, eventually, good reporters will get you to say something other than your thing, and then more on their premise, and then they got what they need, and you say, well, I talked to them for an hour, and I got 1 sentence in the paper, and it was that last thing I said. Well,
I mean, just candidly, one last point also is that today you can ask a reporter to email a question and you can email a response. It's not a very fun way to do business, but it's a very controlled way to do business when you need to. And if in a hostile situation, I've obviously done that plenty of times.
All right, Michael, let's talk about grassroots and how internet access and communication can help with that, because so many times, as you've all touched on, to get things moving, you do have to have grassroots support for ideas. With Twitter, with Facebook, with blogs, those kinds of things, how can you use that to engage and build support for a new idea?
Sure. So ultimately, the internet is a medium of people. And the one thing that's sort of along the lines of no comment is, to me, the equivalent is when somebody writes a question on your blog or on your Facebook page or tweets at you with a question and you don't write back. That's the equivalent of no comment. We're talking about as long as it's within the guidelines of something you should engage with. And that's almost the same thing as if somebody came up to you in the hall today, right outside, and said, you know, I read your press release the other day, and I just completely disagree. I can't believe you believe X, Y, Z, and you just kept walking. So every opportunity you have to engage with someone is an opportunity to attract a supporter, whether that's through growing your email list, through growing your following on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Again, knowing your goals and why you're on a particular medium is important. You don't just have to say like, well, we got to be on Facebook because, I don't know, we're on Facebook. Facebook is great for, mostly for parents and teachers. Twitter is great for reporters and influencers. So know your medium and then keep track. There's no way you're going to build a grassroots movement if you have no idea who your supporters are, if you have no ability to communicate with them, to segment them and categorize them into these are people who just visit the website, these are people who sign up for email, these are people who open the emails, these are people who open the emails and click on the link. Well, if we're going to ask people to take action, let's just do a subset of those people who open our emails all the time and who always take action. So a lot of building a grassroots movement online is no different than building a grassroots movement on other media. You have to know your audience and communicate with them regularly. One very quick thing, I mentioned this yesterday, and it's important to point out because I imagine some of you are frustrated with social media. You hear Mike say he has 50,000 followers on Twitter, and you're like, we have 50. Oh my God, if I were on TV, I'd put my tweet in. So these are businesses. Google's a business. You might own stock in Google. Facebook, you might, maybe, I don't know, own stock in Facebook. I'm sorry if you did initially, maybe now. But, and Twitter's about to go public, right? These are businesses. Yes, they're free for us to use, but if you want to grow a following, they force you to advertise. And that's not a bad thing. Just keep that in mind, because on Facebook, you can target just to parents who have children under the age of 18 in these 6 zip codes. So if you want to reach a very targeted audience, you can do that. But you have to advertise. And if you advertise even a few $100 a week or a few $100 a month, you'll see that your community on these platforms will begin to grow, because that's how their businesses, they basically force you to advertise to grow your community these days, unless you're on Meet the Press.
The one point I'd make about grassroots organizations, people forget we can get hypnotized by technology. Nobody joins the grassroots movement because they like the HTML, whatever code of the email. There's a compelling idea. There's the best grassroots organizational story in the history of the world, at least in politics, is Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and 18 guys took over Russia. Why? They had an idea. And then they organized to that very compelling idea. So all your grassroots communication has to be about the idea, the benefit, what is the purpose to do this? And then the technology helps amplify that. So everything boils down to the cause, the idea, the message.
All right, next topic, and I'll start with Peter. A lot of times what you're talking about is innovation, reform, change. For a lot of people, that is very scary. And you all have mentioned the word fear. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with messaging around fear and resistance to change?
Well, I wouldn't say that I've been 100% successful with it, but I would say that I think we kind of have to make some of this stuff safer for people. And I think that teacher evaluation is a good example. It's an issue that 95 to 99% of teachers will never get fired, even in our wildest fantasies of a high accountability system. And yet we've let the whole evaluation conversation be about firing teachers. And I think that was a big mistake. And to the extent, I wasn't careful enough, or others involved in this conversation weren't careful enough, I think that's something to think about. We're really not trying to fire our way to a better teaching force. We're really trying to train and strengthen and support teachers. And that's mostly what evaluation is about. It should be about, you're a good person, you're a good teacher, but you're not getting great results in the classroom, or we've just raised standards in your state, which is a reality all across the country, and now you've got to do things differently. And helping them see that we're going to invest, we're going to support you, and even as we hold you accountable, we're not going to be ridiculous and unreasonable about it. We're going to be sort of thoughtful and supportive about it, is a big example. So that's to me one very real example that's playing out in America all today. Teachers like Common Core, as Mike said, and national surveys confirm what he found in Florida. Teachers, believe it or not, like teacher evaluation. They like it. Chicago, which just went through a strike, the first strike in 25 years, a survey just came out, and the teachers like the evaluation. They're nervous about the use of student achievement in their evaluation because they're also misinformed about how much it counts. They think it counts for a lot more than it does. In Chicago, it only counts for 25%. Some states, it's up to 50. But my point is that, you know, these are our validators. These are our troops. These are the people in front of the classrooms every day. We have to make issues like this safe for them and not feel threatened by them. That doesn't mean there isn't a small subset of the people at the bottom who probably shouldn't be in this field, as in any field, and we ought to figure out a way to manage that. But you know, we've let the evaluation conversation go in the wrong direction. I think we need to fix that.
Yeah,
I could probably think of other examples.
I just want to chime in because I agree totally with the hope beats fear in education. There's so much bad news out there that good news or hopeful news or way forward news has a huge advantage of being different and standing out. You tell people, oh, schools are in trouble, their ears glaze over. You tell them, hey, there's good stuff happening so more kids can go to college, their ears perk up. Really? Hope? It's the most powerful thing in the world. I was in a campaign once for governor. We were the challenger in a big swing state, and we were tangled up in the teacher accountability, firing teachers thing. And a lot of the time what you want to do with messaging is preempt the bad thing. Don't let them own the bad thing. Own it on your terms. Back to framing. So our shtick was, great teachers are going to get rewarded, and not so great teachers are going to get better. Fix, not fire. All of a sudden, all that energy of we got to shake up these teachers, but I can't fire old Mabel, you know, because what's she going to do? Went into, okay, fix, not fire. And boom, it went away. They couldn't touch us on it. We won the election. So you always want to do what I call messaging, capture the energy and just put it on your terms somewhere. So you give people a place to land where they feel okay about cracking down a little bit on teacher competence, but they don't think it's going to be draconian tactics that they don't feel so good about. Give them an excuse to feel good about doing the right thing. Give them a path, capture the energy. It's always what you want to do in framing.
All right, so there's good information, there's negative information out there. Michael, what happens though when there's misinformation? When it's out there in the digital world, what can you do to get a hold of that?
So, I mean, it's real. I mean, everything today is recorded. Everything. And we talk about this, that media used to be very fleeting. If you didn't tune in to television at that moment, that there was a very high likelihood that no one would ever see that clip ever again. Now, everything that's said can be taken out of context and can be published, and Wikipedia is a great example of where it's a community of individuals who manage the reputation of large corporations, individuals, and organizations. The first thing is listening. You could just set up Google alerts to make sure that people who are talking about you are not saying things that happen to be incorrect. There are ways that you could pull down information if it's truly untruthful. But generally speaking, the only way to combat negative information is with positive information. You're not going to get results on Google that are negative down just by hoping and praying that they go away. You need to be constantly proactive. Was it 80% of what was the
About 70 or whatever.
70% positive, and then 30% was responding to negative. Online, you should constantly be coming up with new content that can help push negative information down. I'll talk about Wikipedia really quickly. You should check what Wikipedia says about you in particular issues. You could always go onto the talk page of Wikipedia and say, I have a bit of a conflict here because I'm very involved in this issue, so I don't want to edit the Wikipedia page directly, but I'm here in the talk page pointing out that this fact is not a fact. This piece of information is untrue. Here's the story that proves it. And Wikipedia editors, they're all volunteers, will come along and see that and make that correction. So there are ways to correct the record online.
And Peter, what if it's something that media has misstated, something in print, television, radio?
Well, you should go back to the media, the traditional media, every time they're wrong. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. I usually go to the reporter first, try and get them to stop saying it. They don't really like running corrections, and nobody reads corrections anyway, so it's a tiny little item, no big deal. But if you achieve the result of having them not repeat the mistake again, that's worth it. Secondly, if you have a reporter who insists on continuing to do it, you can go over the reporter's head. That doesn't play very well, does it, Shannon?
It works.
But if you have to go over a reporter's head to an editor, you can. Most of the times the editor takes the reporter's side, so you just have to prove it. And then, of course, there's the letter to the editor, which, of course, no one reads as well, but it does correct the record. So these are the things you can do, but quite often when they get something wrong, you know, more people will see the wrong than the right, and you just have to, over time, fix it.
Yeah, I want to echo that, but the biggest thing to do is move forward. Because the clip you hate so much on page 842 that you read 9 times is going to be wrapped around a halibut the next day. And what happens too often is people get, Pat Garofalo wrote that joke. No, he just tweeted, said $5 if I mention his name. That's an effective tweet. Had a message I cared about, $5, and gave me a call to action what I was supposed to do. But people, what happens is they internalize it. Well, that newspaper always lies, so we're going to teach them a lesson. We're never going to talk to them again. Okay, you're going to give away the free microphone in a public battle because you're mad that somebody got a story right when there are 1,000 stories a day and people, you're lucky if people read half of them. So always forward. You want to try to correct it. One of the neat things you can do now, which we couldn't do back in the print day when a newspaper or somebody gets something wrong and they agree to your correction. No, that's okay. We'll give it to the cause. Thank you. I now have a tip jar here. They can fix the copy on the internet a little, which is a good idea because it lives forever in terms of Google searches backward and everything. So it's worth the tussle. But then onward. You're always on defense fixing errors, and errors get made. So don't use that as an excuse not to engage or to get burned or to personalize it because you're really upset about some stupid mistake somebody made. They're human too, and they do make plenty of mistakes.
Not plenty. No, kidding. Okay, we want to make sure that you have a voice in this as well. And if you have a question, I'll repeat it so the folks who are recording will get it. And if it's directed to someone specific or everyone up here, just let us know. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mike, you had some great numbers at the beginning about Common Core and public data.
Yes.
But we're 4 years into this battle, and the fact that people know very, very little about it has to be a little bit startling to us.
Right.
And then on the other side, you've got people like Glenn Beck and Michelle Malkin who have a megaphone the size of the Bream monster
Right.
spewing disinformation. So
Right.
if we were to try to change this trend and get the new information out there,
Right.
how would we start that campaign?
All right, and let me quickly repeat so it gets recorded. The question was about 4 years into Common Core. There's still a lot of people who don't know. There may be misinformation out there as well. So 4 years into it, how do you turn the tide?
Well, yeah, look, when the opposition has a big microphone, you have a bigger challenge. So and then life is unfair in some ways. So what do you do about it? One, you get better at punching above your weight, which is, we've been talking about it 4 years in jargon to each other. So why don't we declare that model over with? It's been tested. And when you're losing a fight in communications to AM radio, by the way, AM radio is not the giant hammer. And by the way, you're only losing it with a small subsection of the population. The problem is that's an influential subsection, as anybody who's been shorting treasury bills will tell you over the last week. So, which I say as a cranky conservative Republican who wants to fix some of that in the party. I would recommend, one, talk English and more communication. And two, you've got to use the social media tool, because that's the one organic voice that, if done well, has huge power at relatively low cost. Third, and this is something I'm working on and the foundation's working on, we're trying to get more into the air cover business and try to unify all the groups working on this. So that's one reason we did all this polling, is so we have shared intellectual property on messaging, and we can get the whole choir hitting the right note and the right melody. So help is on the way, but that still means you have the better message and more effective message, but you have to get it outside the education bubble and into parents. You have to communicate them, and mastering social media is the first step. And then those of us who are working with some of the groups are hopefully going to be able to give you some more help. We're definitely about to do a project in Florida. So just keep at it.
Peter, did you have something?
Yeah, just to remind you again, the first 3 questions I asked was, who's the audience, what's your message, and how are you reaching them? And I don't think those 3 questions have been asked around the issue of Common Core. No one has had a concerted effort to educate the public about Common Core, and that's a big deal. That doesn't happen like just with a couple of op-eds. And secondly, I think the message is not that confusing. It's to high standards, preparing our kids for the global economy, and so I don't think the message is the problem. And I think then the third one is, how are we reaching them? And I don't think we've answered that question well either. The other thing is that Common Core doesn't have a center. There's no organization called Common Core. Common Core is a set of standards that 45 states have adopted. No single entity is in charge of driving Common Core. And that's something I think actually we need to think about, and think about whether there ought to be some kind of a central focus around how to push it forward.
Michael, did you want to add anything?
No, let's hear more questions.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So appreciate this conversation. We're having similar conversations. If each of you could banish one word from the reform lexicon, what would you take away?
All right, so the question is, what one word would you banish from the reform discussion?
Wow, there's so many. I want to say lexicon just to get the joke off, but that's actually an appropriate word to bring up to talk about it. I'm having a problem landing on one word. One is I don't travel in educational technical circles. The minute that talk starts, there's a roadrunner cloud where I was standing. I'm out the door to the campaign world. But I want to hear students more, and parents more, and fourth graders more, and college more. Less outcome, less words like curriculum, which is an important word, but that's where there's a lot of confusion. And less processy words.
I think I'd ban the word failure. I don't think it helps us. Certainly there's examples of failing schools. Certainly we can say that certain kids have been failed by the system. But ultimately, I go back to what I said before. We have to show people that this can be done, not keep on defining the problem and spending our life defining the problem. And I think that failure is a word that just creates more enemies than allies.
And mine would be more just internally that, we can't. Like I do hear often from organizations, we don't have the resources to engage online, we don't have the know-how to engage online, and these are media we use day in, day out in our personal lives, and it's very difficult to screw up social media if you're transparent and you're honest and you're on message.
In our data, one thing people like about when they learn about Common Core, when they look at the state-to-state comparisons, like if my kid were to move to another state, with the different standards make it harder to get to college, they get very upset, is that they're fair. Fair is a good word. They're fair and balanced, actually.
I like those words. Thanks, Mike.
It'd be great to hear them used accurately.
Yeah. Accuracy.
Oh, now here we are.
Accuracy is
We
always
don't
goal
want the
number
ugly
one.
partisanship to divide a bipartisan movement here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm a senator, and we're fighting from the trenches here on Common Core. So I have two quick technical questions. Battle reporters, should we answer back battle for battle, or is it better to just take the high ground and try not to engage in that sort of a question? And then the second one on the Facebook, is it better to hide comments from folks that come into your Facebook, or because most of them are negative and most of them are goofy, but is it because you can do that little switch and hide them, or is it better just let everybody in the world see everybody's attacking you?
Okay, so do you engage battle reporters and do you hide Facebook comments on your pages?
So I'll take the battle one. That was my idea. So I think that you do engage in battles when you have to. I just think the trick is to sort of get the high ground in a battle fight. Some people do that rather artlessly. The big version of it in education is, I'm putting kids, I'm for kids, and you're not. And I would discourage that because I don't think it really plays well. People use that against unions a lot, and it tends to provoke a defensive response from teachers, which is not what you want to do. I understand that, people want to challenge unions. We challenge unions. But people have very different feelings about them, and I'm personally not against them. But so I would say yes, you engage in battle. But the trick in battle is to see if you can get the high ground. So have people come away from the article thinking, you're fighting the right fight and the other guy isn't.
I'm always surprised by the vitriol online, especially considering that a lot of it is personally identifiable back to an individual. I mean, on Facebook, you're not Santa Claus. You are who you are. And I'm always surprised because now with LinkedIn, you can always just see someone and where they work and who their boss is. And I'm genuinely surprised by how negative people get when they are online. It's a behavior that doesn't really mirror itself in real life. But the best way to combat that is with a policy. So we for all of the organizations we work with on their Facebook page, you can sort of have like an About Us section. And whether you post it there or have a link to it where it exists back on your website, we always say you need to have a policy. And the policy says, no profanity, we encourage all voices and all communication. We want all opinions expressed. This is for everyone to tell us what you think and what you feel, but no personal attacks, no personally identifiable information about people you're attacking, like, now this is where that person lives. And if you have a policy that's encourages openness and fairness in the conversation, then you have every right to delete a comment from the Facebook page that violates that policy. And as long as you can go back and say, when someone says, hey, you deleted this and you deleted my friend's things, we have a policy here. This is not the forum for unconstructive dialogue. We want to have a constructive conversation. We welcome all voices. We hope you'll come back and be more constructive, because we do want to hear all opinions.
Just one point about battle stories, because I agree. There's another phrase for them, process stories. And the media love a good process story. There's actually a conspiracy cooked up at a dinner once between a bunch of political consultants on both sides that we were so tired of reading the same old gimmicky group every year, new-collar dads, soccer moms, what the whole election's about. So we invented a fake group, Upwardly Mobile Latinos, Uptinos. And we had a contest to see who could get it in the New York Times first. I told that once to the editor of the New York Times, who's still furious. No sense of humor about it at all. But one thing you will find yourself doing in print communication is always be thinking when a reporter calls with a process premise, to find a way to sneak your voter content, your people content, your parent content into that story, maybe through a process cloak. Because if you put out a press release which is new plan to help 40% more fourth graders make it into college, you may get a yawn. But if you get a call about, in a campaign would be, we hear you're doing secret internet focus groups with Twitter. Yes, we're testing our plan to help more fourth graders get to college with 4 different. So sometimes you have to use the process interest, but you should always remember, at home, nobody cares about process. Nobody. People care about content for their lives. And so sometimes you want to try to subvert a process story to sell the stuff.
All right, we're working our way around the room. Yes, sir?
Hi, Mike, Peter, Michael. Frank Biden, I'm with the Florida Charter School Alliance.
Oh, great.
And, I want to switch the conversation over a little bit to choice and to charter schools in particular, and to the blowback that we get media-wise in terms of privatization and the like. And what my specific question is about, do you have any data or testing on the message that is being spread now by as diverse people as myself, Frank Biden, obvious association there, and Eric Cantor just up in Philadelphia a month ago talking about choice being the civil rights issue of the 21st century. The schools and the population, the schools that we have and the population that we serve are kids who are well behind the 8 ball and who have no choice. And yet we're still bombarded with the old, tired, phraseology in the media about our wanting to privatize, take over the public school system. My mantra has been that we want to work in cooperation with the public school system. After all, we're public schools.
Yeah.
So I'd appreciate your comments on that and the whole business of bipartisanship, which this conference demonstrates, and I applaud Jeb Bush. He's one of my heroes, and along with my brother Joe, but 2 diverse people, but on message on one thing. So thank you.
And
Yes,
again,
we-
I'm sorry, just quickly so it's recording. Again, the question about choice in charter schools and whether there's data out there and messaging it as a 21st century civil rights issue, and the fact that it's bipartisan.
Yeah, I'll just quickly address it. One, thank you for what you do. I'm familiar with the school. In this polling, we didn't get very much into the choice charter stuff, so I don't have anything new to tell you. Stuff I've seen in the past, it's very simple, and you instinctively had it just right. When people see charter schools as part of the public school system and a way to inspire it to do better and give parents options within the system, they're very supportive. When they see charter schools as an opponent of public schools, as an outlier, as an antagonist of the idea of public education, they get very hostile. So as you said, they are public schools. They're part of inspiring public schools to do better. You always have to be part of the public school identity.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of thoughts about that. So I think that choice was a very successful kind of policy idea. Like it got a lot of people to say, gee, choice is a good idea. We ought to have choice. I think as a message, I think the charter school movement broadly is getting hit a lot on quality. And I think that the charter school movement broadly needs to really focus on getting back to a quality message. You're absolutely right that there's misinformation about charters are not public and privatization, and that should be fixed as well. But as I think about choice as a civil rights issue, I think there's an awful lot packed into that statement. And my first reaction is I don't know how well that works. It'd be interesting to test it. I've certainly used the phrase, and Arnie Duncan uses it all the time, education is a civil rights issue. But for you to then attach choice, which is a loaded word in this society in a lot of ways, attach that to civil rights, I think is a complicated one. And more importantly, I really think the charter school community broadly needs to start thinking about how to deal with the quality issue.
I just go back to making sure that when people are searching for information online, again, not just the primary topic of choice, but all the acronyms and the lexicon that the insiders use, that when people search online that they're finding information that's positive and factual. So don't just think about what are they searching for when they first type in a term, but think about all the different things that people would talk about online as it relates to that issue.
All right, I think we'll get in 2 more questions. Our next to last over here. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for what you're doing. From a state where the unions do absolutely control, and I will not pull any punches and I will not hold back, what's going on in education, and where Facebook and these new ways of communicating are fantastic, but they do not reach 100% of my constituency. How is it that you would recommend we try to reach those who do not rely on those new forms of interfacing with folks, but how do we get our message out to when the big, the union money owns the microphone and owns the other medium? How do we do it as a minority group? Thank you.
All right, again, the question is, we're in a state where the union pretty much controls message, has the money, and you want to share an additional message or other information. How do you do that?
I mean, obviously there are a lot of platforms, and one that I like a lot, and I think people underuse it, but it takes a lot of time. It's retail, and it's really face-to-face. And I think that people too often don't take the trouble. It's kind of like focus grouping, but it's more organic, which is to say, find ways to get in front of the people you want to reach, even if they're small numbers to start with, and find out if you can really move them. And then you can build up to larger and larger groups. But I think that, I mean, if you don't have any money and you feel like you're up against somebody with big money, I think you have to go down on the ground level and get people to people. And it's not very efficient, but besides obviously putting out press releases and getting engaged and starting a Twitter account and all things that you can do, I think people sometimes underestimate the importance of face-to-face connections and building a face-to-face relationship.
I totally agree. You get into one school with an activist teacher who can be online trained for some of the tactics of organization, you can start to organically build. It's hard, but school by school. And frankly, before we had all this stuff, that's how we did every kind of organization. We're a little spoiled now with social media.
Well, one other point, I mean, you should put together a list of 5 to 50 validators and influencers and go at them. And you can't go at them by sending out a tweet. You probably have to go at them one-on-one and sit down with this business leader or this mayor or this, policy thinker or something and say, how do you feel about this? Can we get you on board? And eventually you start to build this. I mean, this is hard work, but that's another way to do it.
All right, our final question.
Camille Wells, Idaho State Department of Education. We know that parents trust teachers most as their source of information. However, we struggle with teachers being fearful of being communicators. How do we empower them to be effective communicators about the Common Core?
Okay, and again, that parents trust teachers as a source of information. How can you empower them with messaging?
So what I would say is that teachers like Common Core. They like being teachers. They don't like being politicians. And so ask them to be teachers and ask them to speak as teachers, not to get used in sort of politically challenging situations. Give them forums where they can just say, here's what's happening in my class, not here's what the state policy ought to be. I mean, it sounds simple, but you know, you really have to give them, you have to make them comfortable and create an environment where they're comfortable. Put together 10 of them on a panel and an audience of parents and just ask them how they feel about Common Core. I think using them in creative and new ways is critical to the success of Common Core.
And if you create materials that are not propaganda, but are factual about what's going on, what some of the challenges are, that are quite balanced but informative and credible, and they don't feel like they're proselytizing, but they're informing, those materials can get disseminated if they have the comfort with them. So that you can't, sometimes we activists want to overplay our hand a little bit, and everything we want to put out has 7 exclamation points on it. The key is getting your field force, your teachers, your active parents, to be comfortable enough with the material they put their own credibility on the line to disseminate it.
Anything to add, Michael? All right. Well, thank you all for your interaction and to our excellent panel.